Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
You know what's funny? My family called me selfish and heartless when my parents lost their house, and they had no idea I just paid off my brother's entire mortgage in secret. Yeah, this is the story of how trying to do the right thing turned me into the villain of my own family. When my parents called a family meeting, I had no idea it would end with the floor falling out from under us. It wasn't unusual for them to call us together when something big was happening, but the tone of my dad's voice on the phone had been off. "We need to talk," he said, and that was it. No details, no small talk. Just those four words. We all gathered in the living room on a Sunday afternoon. My sister, Amanda, sat scrolling on her phone, acting like she didn't care, but I could tell by the way she kept glancing at Mom that she was nervous. Tim, my older brother, came in last, his toddler hanging off one arm and his wife trailing behind him. I noticed my dad hadn't made coffee, and that was the first sign something was seriously wrong. My mom started talking first. Her voice trembled as she said, "Your father's business, well, it's not doing well. Actually, it's not doing anything at all. The last couple of clients didn't pay, and we're so far behind on the mortgage now," her words caught in her throat. My dad picked up from there, his tone flat and resigned. "The bank's foreclosing. We've tried everything, but there's nothing left to do. We're going to lose the house." The words hit the room like a punch to the gut. Amanda froze mid-scroll. Tim muttered something under his breath. I just sat there, staring at the beige carpet under my feet. Mom broke the silence. "We didn't want to ask, but we need your help. Anything you can do." Then she turned to me. "You got a steady job. You can help, right?" There it was, the spotlight on me, the reliable one. Amanda and Tim didn't even get a glance. I felt the weight of their expectations, but I had no idea how to explain my situation. I started, fumbling for words. "I can try," but I didn't even get to finish before Amanda let out an exaggerated sigh. "Of course you can't," she muttered, shaking her head. "Why even bother asking?" My dad didn't say anything, but he wouldn't look at me either. That hurt more than Amanda's jab. "I'll do what I can," I finally said, though my stomach was already twisting into knots. Because what I didn't say, what I couldn't say, was that I didn't have anything left. 2 months earlier, I'd done something huge for Tim, something I'd sworn I'd take to my grave. After the meeting, I drove home in a daze, replaying the conversation over and over. My mom's words, "You got a steady job," felt like a knife twisting in my chest. What they didn't know was that steady didn't mean secure. I worked in marketing, and while my paycheck was consistent, it barely covered my rent, bills, and student loans. And then there was what I'd done for Tim. 2 months ago, he called me in a panic, saying he was about to lose his house. His wife's part-time job didn't cover much, and his hours at work had been cut. "Please," he'd said, his voice breaking. "I don't know what else to do." I couldn't say no. Tim had always been there for me when we were kids, sticking up for me when Amanda bullied me, or helping me with homework when Mom and Dad were too busy. So, without telling anyone, not even my parents, I emptied my savings, maxed out my credit card, and wrote a check to pay off his remaining mortgage balance. Tim had been so grateful. "You're a lifesaver," he said, hugging me in his driveway. "I swear I'll pay you back." But then, weeks went by, and I didn't hear from him. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I felt trapped. My family thought I was their safety net, their backup plan. But I was sinking, too, and I didn't know how much longer I could tread water. The next day, I got a text from Amanda. "Have you figured out what you can pitch in yet?" Mom's stressing out. "No, hey, no, how are you?" Just straight to the point. I didn't respond right away. By the end of the week, my mom had started calling. "We need to know what you can do," she said. "It's not fair to keep us waiting." It wasn't fair? My chest tightened. I wanted to scream into the phone. "Do you know what I've already done? Do you know how much I've sacrificed for this family?" But I didn't. Instead, I just muttered, "I'll figure something out," and hung up. But deep down, I knew there was nothing left to figure out. I was already running on empty. It's funny how secrets feel heavy even when no one knows them. As I sat in that family meeting, my mom's words replaying in my head, "You got a steady job, you can help, right?" I felt the weight of what I'd done for Tim pressing harder than ever. It had started with a phone call. I was at work trying to get through an endless spreadsheet when my phone buzzed. It was Tim. He never called during the day unless it was important, so I stepped outside to answer. "Hey," he said, his voice trembling. "Can you talk for a minute?" "Yeah, what's up?" I asked, already bracing myself. Tim didn't waste time. "I don't know how to say this, but we're in trouble. The bank's about to foreclose on our house. I've tried everything, borrowing, cutting costs, but it's not enough. If we don't pay the balance by the end of the month, We're out. I was stunned. Tim wasn't the type to panic, let alone ask for help. How much do you need? I asked, my stomach sinking. He hesitated. It's bad, Sam. Really bad. We're short almost 30 grand. 30 grand. The number hit me like a slap. I didn't have that kind of money just lying around. But I could hear the desperation in his voice, and I knew what this house meant to him. It wasn't just bricks and mortar. It was where his kids were growing up, where they had their Christmas mornings and birthday parties. What are you going to do? I asked, hoping he had a backup plan. He let out a bitter laugh. I don't know. I'm out of options. I just thought maybe. His voice trailed off. That's when I made the decision. I'll help you, I said, the words coming out before I could fully process them. I'll cover the balance. Tim was quiet for a moment. Then his voice broke. Are you serious? Sam, I can't let you. It's fine, I interrupted. I'll figure it out. You got kids to think about. I'll handle this. I wasn't entirely sure how I'd handle it, but I made it work. First, I emptied out my savings account. It wasn't much, just over 10 grand, but it was a start. Then I maxed out my credit cards one after the other. I even took out a small personal loan, which I knew was risky, but I couldn't let Tim lose his home. When I handed him the check a week later, he hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. You saved us, he said. I'll never forget this, Sam. I swear. I'll pay you back. I waved him off. Just don't tell anyone, okay? Mom and Dad don't need to know, and Amanda would never let me hear the end of it. He nodded. I won't say a word. At first, I felt good about what I'd done. I'd helped Tim and his family stay in their home. That had to count for something, right? But as the weeks went on, the reality of what I'd done started to sink in. My savings were gone, my credit cards were maxed, and the loan payments were eating into my already tight budget. Meanwhile, Tim went back to his life as if nothing had happened. He didn't check in, didn't ask how I was doing. I wasn't expecting a parade or anything, but a simple, "How are you holding up?" would have been nice. And now, sitting in this meeting with my parents and siblings, I felt trapped. My mom's expectant gaze, Amanda's snarky comments, and Dad's silent disapproval were like a spotlight on everything I couldn't say. You don't even have kids to worry about, Amanda said, breaking the tense silence. Why can't you step up for Mom and Dad? Her words hit like a slap, and I felt my face heat up. I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to yell, I already stepped up. I stepped up so hard I'm drowning, and none of you even know it. But I didn't. Instead, I took a deep breath and said, I'll do what I can. Amanda rolled her eyes. Right, like that means anything. My mom sighed. It's not fair to your father and me to keep us guessing, Sam. We need to know what you can contribute. I said I'll figure it out. I replied, my voice sharper than I intended. The room fell silent. Tim, who hadn't said a word all night, finally looked at me. For a brief second, I thought he might say something, maybe even speak up on my behalf, but he just looked down at his hands. That night, I drove home feeling like the walls were closing in. My parents needed help. My sister thought I was useless. And Tim, the one person who knew the truth, stayed silent. When I got home, I opened my banking app and stared at the numbers. My checking account was barely over $100. My credit cards were maxed, and my loan payment was due in a week. I felt a wave of panic rising in my chest. I had nothing left to give. But how could I tell my family that without revealing what I'd done for Tim? I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mom's disappointed face, Amanda's glare, and Tim's silence. And for the first time, I wondered if I'd made a huge mistake. By the next morning, I knew one thing for sure. The secret I'd promised to keep was going to destroy me. The days after that family meeting blurred into a mess of guilt, frustration, and exhaustion. My phone became an instrument of torture. Every day, a new call or text from my mom, Amanda, or even my dad, who usually stayed out of things, demanded updates. Have you figured out how much you can help with yet? We need to know what's realistic, Sam. Your mom's really worried. I started to dread the sound of my ringtone. It didn't matter what I said. It was never enough. One night, after a particularly long shift at work, my mom called while I was walking to my car. I answered, already bracing myself. So, how much can you send us this month? She asked, skipping any pleasantries. Mom, I told you, I said, trying to keep the weariness out of my voice. I'm still figuring it out. Things are tight for me right now. Her sigh on the other end was heavy with disappointment. I just don't understand, Sam. You've always been good with money. You don't have kids. You don't have a mortgage. What's eating up all your income? The question hit me like a freight train. I wanted to scream, your son's mortgage, Mom. That's what's eating my income. But I bit my tongue. It's just expenses, you know? Rent, bills, student loans. Life's expensive. Well, Maybe you need to budget better, she said, her tone sharp. I guess some people are just better with money than others. I hung up after that, mumbling something about being tired. My hands were shaking as I got into my car. The accusation in her voice, like I was being irresponsible or selfish, felt like a slap in the face. Meanwhile, Amanda wasn't shy about letting me know how she felt. At first, it was subtle, a passive-aggressive comment here, a snarky text there. But soon it escalated. One afternoon, she texted me out of nowhere. I don't get why you're being so stingy. It's your family. You'd think you'd want to help. I stared at the message for a long time before typing back. I'm doing the best I can. Her reply came almost instantly, obviously not hard enough. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat felt tight, and I shoved my phone into my pocket like it was burning my hand. The worst part, though, was Tim. Ever since I'd handed him that check, he'd been distant. At first, I chalked it up to him being busy. He had a full-time job and 3 kids, after all. But as the days turned into weeks, it became clear he was avoiding me. He stopped answering my texts, didn't return my calls, and when I did see him at family gatherings, he barely made eye contact. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. I hadn't expected him to bow down and kiss my feet, but I thought there'd at least be some acknowledgement, some sense that he understood what I'd done for him. Instead, he acted like nothing had happened. Worse, he seemed relieved when I didn't bring it up. Work became my escape. I started volunteering for overtime and taking on extra projects, anything to stay out of the house and away from my phone. My coworkers joked that I was becoming a workaholic, but I didn't care. The truth was I didn't want to go home. My apartment, once a place of comfort, had turned into a space of anxiety and sleepless nights. I'd lie awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying conversations with my family over and over in my head. One night, after an especially long shift, I came home to find a voicemail from my mom. Sam, it's me. I just wanted to remind you about your dad's doctor's appointment next week. He's so stressed about everything, and I'm worried about his blood pressure. I know you're busy, but well, if you could send anything soon, it would really help. I deleted the message without replying. It wasn't that I didn't care about my dad's health. I did, but I couldn't keep doing this. I was barely keeping myself afloat, and every time they asked for more, it felt like they were pushing me further underwater. The breaking point came a few weeks later. I was sitting in my tiny living room, going over my budget for the millionth time. Between my rent, utility bills, and the payments on the loan I'd taken out for Tim, I had about $50 left for the month. $50. I was staring at the numbers when my phone buzzed again. It was Amanda. We're all pitching in to help Mom and Dad get a new place. You're in, right? I couldn't take it anymore. I called her back, and when she answered, I didn't even let her speak. You don't get it, Amanda, I said, my voice shaking. I'm broke. I'm not just saying that. I literally don't have any money left to give. I'm drowning in debt. And you keep acting like I'm holding out on purpose. She was quiet for a moment, then said, What debt? What are you even spending your money on, Sam? You don't have kids. You don't own a house. What could possibly be so expensive? I opened my mouth to tell her the truth, to finally spill everything about Tim and the mortgage, but the words wouldn't come out. I'd promised to keep it a secret, and even though I was angry, I didn't want to throw Tim under the bus. It's none of your business, I said finally. She let out a short, humorless laugh. None of my business? This is our family, Sam. You don't get to be a part of it only when it's convenient for you. She hung up before I could respond. After that, I stopped answering their calls and texts. The guilt and frustration were eating me alive, but I couldn't keep being their punching bag. One night, as I was leaving work, I sat in my car for a long time, staring at my phone. I thought about calling Tim, asking him why he'd gone radio silent, why he hadn't defended me even once. But I didn't. Instead, I drove home, crawled into bed, and stared at the ceiling, wondering how things had gotten so bad, and whether they'd ever get better. The second family meeting wasn't called so much as it was commanded. My mom's text said, Family meeting at our place, Sunday at 5. We have news. There was no room for excuses or debate. The ominous tone told me exactly what the news was, but part of me still hoped I was wrong. When I walked into my parents' living room, the air felt heavier than usual. My dad was sitting on the edge of his recliner, hands clasped tightly, while my mom paced the room like she was trying to wear a groove into the floor. Amanda and Tim were already there, Amanda scrolling on her phone and Tim awkwardly fidgeting with his wedding ring. My mom didn't waste any time. The bank has given us the final notice, she said, her voice strained. We have 30 days to leave the house. Her words hung in the air like smoke. Amanda gasped dramatically, and Tim muttered something under his breath, but I just sat there numb. I'd seen this coming, but hearing it out loud was still like a punch to the gut. We don't know where we're going yet, my mom continued. But it's going to be hard. Your dad and I are looking at apartments, but rent isn't cheap. We were really hoping, well, we thought you'd care more about your family. She looked directly at me as she said it. Something inside me snapped. I do care, I said, louder than I intended. You don't even know what I've done to help. The room went silent. Amanda stopped scrolling, her eyes narrowing at me. Tim froze mid-fidget. My mom and dad both stared, clearly not expecting me to speak up. What's that supposed to mean? Amanda asked, her voice laced with suspicion. I hesitated, my heart pounding. For a split second, I considered telling them everything. About Tim's call, the mortgage, the thousands of dollars I'd drained from my savings. But I stopped myself. It doesn't matter, I said, shaking my head. No, it obviously does, Amanda shot back. If you've done so much, why don't you just say it? What's the big secret? I clenched my fists, trying to keep my voice steady. Because it's none of your business, Amanda. You think you know everything, but you don't have a clue what I've been dealing with. Don't talk to your sister like that. My mom interjected, her tone sharp. We're a family, and we're supposed to support each other. That's what this is about. Your father, and I shouldn't have to beg for help. I stood up, my chest tight with a mix of anger and frustration. Beg? You've been guilting me for weeks, making me feel like I'm the bad guy when I've already given everything I have. You don't know the half of it, and honestly, maybe you don't deserve to. The words came out before I could stop them, and the look on my mom's face was one I'd never forget. Hurt, shock, a hint of anger. Sam, my dad said quietly, finally speaking up. What's going on? If you've done something to help, just say it. We're not mind readers. I looked at him, then at Tim. Tim, who had gone pale and was staring at the floor like it was the most interesting thing in the world. I thought about pointing at him and spilling the truth, but something held me back. Maybe it was loyalty, or maybe I just didn't want to deal with the fallout. Instead, I shook my head. I can't. Not right now. That's convenient, Amanda muttered under her breath. I turned to her, my voice shaking with anger. You know what, Amanda? I'm done. You want to call me selfish? Fine. Think what you want. But I'm not going to sit here and let you all act like I'm some heartless monster just because I'm not living up to your expectations. Without waiting for a response, I grabbed my bag and walked out of the house. My mom called after me, but I didn't stop. For the first time in my life, I didn't care what they thought of me. I got in my car and drove aimlessly for a while, trying to calm down. My hands were shaking, and my heart was racing like I'd just run a marathon. The things I'd said replayed in my mind, over and over, making me question whether I'd gone too far. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't regret a thing. I'd spent my whole life bending over backward to be the reliable one, the peacemaker, the fixer. And what had it gotten me? A pile of debt, sleepless nights, and a family that still thought I wasn't doing enough. I ended up at a park on the edge of town, parking under a tree and sitting there for what felt like hours. The sun set, and the stars came out, and still, I sat there, staring at the dashboard and trying to figure out where to go from here. The next morning, I woke up to a flood of texts. My mom had sent 3 messages. We need to talk. I don't know what's gotten into you, but this isn't like you. Please call me. Amanda's text was less diplomatic. Nice job throwing a tantrum and storming out. Real mature, Sam. I deleted her message without replying. Tim hadn't texted me at all. That hurt more than anything. For the next few days, I avoided my family. I ignored their calls, let their messages pile up, and threw myself into work. I knew I'd have to face them eventually, but I wasn't ready yet. I needed time to breathe, to process everything. The silence from Tim, though, was harder to ignore. He knew what I'd done for him. He knew why I was struggling. And yet, he'd sat there and said nothing while Amanda and my mom ripped into me. I wanted to call him, to demand an explanation, but part of me was afraid of what he'd say. What if he didn't care? What if he'd already moved on, content to let me carry the weight of his secret alone? The thought made my chest ache, but I pushed it aside. For now, I had to focus on myself. If my family couldn't see how much I was struggling, maybe they didn't deserve to know. After the blow-up at the family meeting, I went radio silent. I stopped answering calls, ignored text messages, and avoided social media like the plague. Every notification felt like another reminder of how badly things had spiraled. But I couldn't face them. Not my mom's disappointed tone, not Amanda's sharp jabs, and definitely not Tim's silence. The weight of it all settled over me like a thick fog. The guilt was relentless, gnawing at me every time I let my phone buzz unanswered. But I knew I couldn't keep being their scapegoat. I was tapped out, emotionally, financially, and mentally. My savings were long gone, My debt was mounting, and yet they still seemed to think I had more to give. For the first time in my life, I let the calls go to voicemail. I let their texts pile up, unanswered, and slowly, the silence became its own kind of refuge. About a week into my self-imposed isolation, I got a text from Tim. Seeing his name pop up on my screen sent a strange mix of emotions through me. Relief, anger, and something that felt a lot like betrayal. "Hey, can we talk? It's been too long." I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity. Part of me wanted to ignore him, just like I'd been ignoring everyone else. But another part of me, the part that still remembered how I'd always looked up to him as a kid, couldn't let it go. I typed back a quick response, "Fine." When? We met up at a small coffee shop on the edge of town, one of those places that's never too crowded. Tim was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with a cup of coffee in front of him. He looked tired, more tired than I'd ever seen him. "Hey," he said when I sat down, his voice quiet. "Hey," I replied, my tone guarded. For a few moments, neither of us said anything. I stirred my coffee, even though I hadn't added anything to it, and Tim kept fidgeting with the lid of his cup. Finally, he broke the silence. "I wanted to thank you," he said, his voice earnest, "for what you did. I know I haven't said it enough, but it meant everything to us. You saved our house, Sam." I looked at him, my chest tightening. I wanted to feel relieved, even happy, that he was finally acknowledging what I'd done. But instead, all I felt was a simmering resentment that had been building for weeks. "That's great, Tim," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "But where were you when I needed someone to back me up? Where were you when Mom and Amanda were treating me like dirt?" He blinked, clearly caught off guard. "I didn't realize." "No, you didn't," I interrupted. "You didn't realize, and you didn't care. I gave you everything I had, literally everything. And then I got to sit there and listen to our family call me selfish while you stayed quiet." Tim's face fell, and for a moment, I thought he might argue. But instead, he just nodded. "You're right," he said quietly. "I screwed up." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I'd been so ready to fight, so prepared for excuses, that his simple admission threw me off balance. "We're doing better now," he continued. "The house is paid off, and we're finally catching up on other bills. Things are stable for the first time in a long time. And that's because of you. I should have said something sooner, but I didn't know how to face you after everything you did." I let out a bitter laugh. "You think saying thanks makes up for it? You think hearing that now erases the fact that I'm drowning in debt because of you? I didn't help you because I wanted praise, Tim. I helped you because you're my brother. But you could have at least had my back when I needed you." He looked down at his cup, his hands tightening around it. "You're right," he said again. "I should have. I'm sorry, Sam. I don't know what else to say." I sighed, leaning back in my chair. The anger was still there, but it was tempered by exhaustion. "There's something else," I said after a moment. "Mom and Dad are losing the house." His head snapped up, his eyes wide. "What?" "They've got 30 days to move out," I said. "They're looking for apartments, but they're struggling. And guess who they think should swoop in and save the day again?" Tim's face darkened. "Why didn't you tell me?" I raised an eyebrow. "Are you serious? You think they'd take your money after what I've been through? They just see it as more proof that I'm not doing enough." Tim leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "This is all so screwed up," he muttered. I don't know what I thought. I figured things would settle down eventually, but it just keeps getting worse." I nodded, staring into my coffee. "Yeah, well, welcome to my world." For a moment, we sat in silence, the weight of everything hanging between us. I didn't know what I expected from this conversation, but it hadn't given me the closure I'd hoped for. If anything, it just left me feeling emptier. Finally, Tim spoke again. "I'll talk to them," he said. "Mom and Dad. I'll tell them something. I don't know if it'll help, but I'll try." I wanted to believe him, but after everything, I wasn't sure I could. "Do what you want," I said, standing up and grabbing my bag. "But don't expect me to clean up the mess this time." As I walked out of the coffee shop, I felt a small flicker of relief, like a weight had been lifted off my chest. But it was quickly replaced by the nagging fear that nothing was going to change, that no matter what I did, I'd always be the one left holding the bag. A week after my conversation with Tim, I got a text from my cousin Liz. It was short and to the point. "Hey, just heard some stuff about you from Amanda. Call me when you can." I stared at my phone, my stomach sinking. Whatever Amanda was saying, it couldn't be good. I debated ignoring it, but Liz wasn't one to stir the pot unless it was serious. With a resigned sigh, I called her back. "Hey," Liz answered immediately. "I didn't think you'd actually call. What's going on?" I asked, skipping the small talk. She hesitated. "It's about Amanda. She's been saying some things about you." About how you've basically abandoned your parents during this whole house situation. I closed my eyes and pinched the bridge of my nose. What exactly did she say? She said you refused to help, Liz said carefully, as if she was trying to gauge my reaction. That you're being selfish and making excuses while the rest of the family is pitching in. She even said you've been avoiding everyone on purpose. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I felt a mix of anger and disbelief bubbling up inside me. Amanda knew nothing about my situation, but that hadn't stopped her from painting me as the villain. Sam, Liz said after a long pause. I'm here, I muttered. I can't believe her. I thought about calling Amanda, confronting her directly, but what would I even say? Hey, stop lying about me, but also, I can't explain why you're wrong because it involves a massive secret I promised to keep. Yeah, that would go over well. Instead, I let it go, or at least I tried to, but the rumors Amanda had started took on a life of their own. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing little changes in how people in my extended family treated me. At a birthday party for one of my cousins, my aunt cornered me in the kitchen. You know, Sam, she said, her tone dripping with passive aggression. Family is everything. Sometimes you have to make sacrifices. Even if it's hard, I wanted to scream. Instead, I forced a smile and said, of course. Then there were the side glances and whispers. At every family gathering, I could feel the judgment radiating off people. I overheard snippets of conversations, phrases like doesn't care, and thought they were better than that. I stopped going to family events after that. If they wanted to believe Amanda's version of the story, so be it. I didn't have the energy to defend myself. At work, I threw myself into overtime. The extra shifts didn't just keep me away from my family drama. They also helped me chip away at the mountain of debt I'd accumulated. Most nights, I stayed at the office long after everyone else had left. I'd sit at my desk, going over spreadsheets or answering emails, trying to distract myself from the mess my life had become. But no matter how busy I stayed, the guilt and resentment lingered like a storm cloud over my head. My coworkers started to notice. You've been working a lot lately. One of them, Sarah, said as we passed each other in the break room. Everything okay? Yeah, just trying to save up, I lied, forcing a smile. Well, don't burn yourself out, she said, giving me a concerned look. I nodded, but I didn't slow down. Burnout felt inevitable, but it also felt like the only option. One night, as I was leaving work, I got a call from Tim. It was the first time he'd called me since our conversation at the coffee shop. Hey, I answered cautiously. Hey, he said, his voice subdued. I just wanted to check in. How are you doing? I almost laughed. Oh, just trying to survive. What about you? He hesitated. I've been hearing some things from Amanda. About you? Let me guess, I said bitterly. I'm selfish. I don't care about the family, and I've abandoned mom and dad? Something like that, he admitted. I didn't believe her, but I thought you should know. Great, I said, leaning against my car. So now she's dragging my name through the mud while you sit back and let it happen? That's not fair, Tim said, his tone defensive. Isn't it? I shot back. You know the truth, Tim. You know everything I've done. And yet, you're still letting Amanda paint me as the bad guy. There was a long pause on his end. You're right, he said finally. I should have said something sooner. But what do you want me to do now? If I tell them the truth, it's just going to make things worse. Worse for who? I asked. You? Or me? He didn't answer. After that conversation, I felt more alone than ever. Tim's silence wasn't just disappointing, it was crushing. He was the one person who could have vindicated me, but he refused to speak up. I started to wonder if I'd made a mistake in helping him. Not because I regretted saving his family's home, but because it had come at such a high cost to me. My finances were in shambles, my reputation with my family was ruined, and the one person who could have eased some of the burden had chosen to stay quiet. Still, I kept my head down and focused on work. It was the only thing I could control, the only thing that felt solid in a world that was falling apart around me. But no matter how many hours I worked, no matter how much progress I made on my debt, the rumors Amanda had started continued to haunt me. And the more I tried to ignore them, the louder they seemed to get. At night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't help but wonder, would it ever stop? Or would I spend the rest of my life paying for a sacrifice no one else knew I'd made? I wasn't expecting the call from Liz. It had been weeks since I'd attended any family gatherings, and my phone had gone mostly silent, save for the occasional passive-aggressive text from Amanda or the infrequent "Are you okay?" from my mom. So when Liz's name popped up on my screen, I hesitated before answering. Hey, Sam, she said, her tone careful but not unkind. Do you have a minute to talk? Sure, I replied cautiously. What's up? There was a brief pause on her end before she said, "Look, I've been hearing some things about you about the situation with your parents, and I just wanted to check in. I don't believe half of what Amanda's been saying, but I thought it'd be better to hear it straight from you." I let out a bitter laugh. "What you been saying now?" Liz hesitated again. "That you've basically checked out of the family. That you don't care about anyone but yourself. She said you refused to help your parents when they needed you most." My chest tightened, even though I'd heard it all before. "And you're calling to see if it's true?" I asked, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. "No," she said firmly. "I'm calling because I know there's more to the story. Amanda's version doesn't add up. I want to understand what's really going on." For some reason, I opened up to Liz in a way I hadn't with anyone else. Maybe it was because she asked without judgment, or maybe it was because I was so damn tired of carrying the burden alone. Whatever the reason, I told her everything. I told her about Tim's call, the panic in his voice when he said he was about to lose his house. I told her about draining my savings, maxing out my credit cards, and taking out a loan to cover the balance of his mortgage. And I told her about the promise I'd made to keep it all a secret, even as my family turned on me. Liz listened quietly, not interrupting once. When I finally finished, there was a long silence on the line. "Holy crap, Sam," she said at last. "That's a lot. I had no idea." "Yeah, well, no one does," I said bitterly. "And now I'm stuck being the villain while Amanda spreads lies about me." "You've got to tell them," Liz said, her voice urgent. "Your parents, Amanda, everyone. They need to know the truth." I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. "I can't. If I tell them, Tim gets thrown under the bus. They'll blame him for everything, and I don't want to do that to him." "But you're okay letting them blame you?" she asked, disbelief creeping into her voice. "It's not about being okay with it," I said, my voice tight. "It's about keeping my word. I promised him I wouldn't say anything, and I'm not breaking that promise now." Liz let out a frustrated sigh. "Sam, I get that you're trying to protect him, but at what cost? This isn't just hurting you. It's tearing the family apart." "I know," I said quietly, "but I'm not ready to deal with the fallout." "Not yet." Liz didn't push me further, but she didn't drop the issue, either. Over the next few days, she started doing what I couldn't, sticking up for me. The first time I heard about it was through Amanda, who texted me out of the blue. "Amanda, did you seriously send Liz to fight your battles for you?" "Real mature, Sam." "Me? I didn't send her anywhere." "What are you even talking about?" "Amanda. She told Mom to lay off you and said you've done more than enough. Care to explain what that's about?" I didn't respond, partly because I didn't know what to say, and partly because I didn't trust myself not to say something I'd regret. When I called Liz later to ask what she'd said, she didn't apologize. "Someone had to do it," she said simply. "Your mom was going on about how she doesn't understand why you've checked out, and I told her she needed to back off. I didn't give her any details, but I made it clear that you've been dealing with a lot." "And Amanda?" I asked. Liz snorted. "Oh, she was pissed. She told me to mind my own business, and I told her to stop spreading lies about you. She didn't take it well." "Yeah, I gathered that," I said dryly. Liz sighed. "Look, I get that you don't want to tell them everything, but you can't keep carrying this alone, Sam. It's not fair to you." "Life's not fair," I muttered. "That's not an excuse to let them treat you like this," she shot back. "You deserve better." Liz's support was a lifeline in a sea of chaos, but it also had unintended consequences. The more she stuck up for me, the more tense things became within the family. Amanda started doubling down on her accusations, framing Liz as some kind of enabler. "Liz doesn't even know the whole story," Amanda said during one particularly heated phone call. "She's just taking your side because she feels sorry for you." "It's not about sides," I snapped. "Maybe if you weren't so busy spreading rumors, people wouldn't feel the need to defend me." "You're unbelievable," Amanda said before hanging up. The tension eventually reached my mom, who called me one evening, her tone equal parts concerned and exasperated. "I don't know what's going on between you and Amanda, but it needs to stop. This family is falling apart, and I can't handle the stress right now." "I'm not the one spreading lies," I said evenly. "Maybe not, but you're not helping either," she replied. "Can't you just apologize and make peace?" The words made my blood boil. Apologize? For what? For not living up to their impossible expectations? For refusing to set myself on fire to keep them warm? "I've got nothing to apologize for," I said tightly. "If Amanda wants peace, she can start by telling the truth." "Sam, my mom began, but I cut her off." "I've got to go, Mom. I'll talk to you later." I hung up, my hands trembling with a mix of anger and frustration. No matter what I did, it felt like I was fighting a losing battle. But at least I wasn't fighting it alone anymore. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. thanks to Liz. Even if I couldn't tell the truth, at least someone believed me. By the time the next family gathering rolled around, I was already dreading it. Months of tension, silence, and unspoken resentment had turned every interaction with my family into a minefield. Still, I knew I couldn't avoid them forever, and when my mom called to insist I come to dinner, I reluctantly agreed. The gathering was at my parents' new apartment, a smaller, dimly lit place that felt worlds away from the house where we'd grown up. The cramped living room was filled with mismatched furniture and the faint smell of paint, and the mood was just as strained. "Thanks for coming," my mom said when I arrived, her tone neutral, but laced with something I couldn't quite place. I nodded and handed her a box of pastries I'd picked up on the way. "Where's everyone else?" "In the kitchen," she said, gesturing toward the clattering of plates and utensils. The dinner started out as awkward as I'd expected. My dad made polite small talk about his new part-time job. Amanda complained about a co-worker, and my mom kept throwing me pointed glances that I pretended not to notice. Tim was unusually quiet, pushing food around on his plate without contributing much to the conversation. Eventually, Amanda decided to break the silence. "So, Sam," she said, her tone sharp and deliberate, "what have you been up to? Still avoiding the family?" I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. "I've been busy," I said, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. "Busy doing what?" she pressed, her eyes narrowing. "It's not like you've been helping Mom and Dad." My mom shifted uncomfortably, and Tim cleared his throat, but Amanda didn't seem to notice or care. "I mean, it's just weird," she continued. "You've been so distant, and we all know you're not struggling financially. So what's your excuse?" I set my fork down and took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. "I don't owe you an explanation, Amanda." She rolled her eyes. "Right? Of course. Always so secretive." Before I could respond, Tim finally spoke up. "Amanda, stop," he said, his voice low but firm. She turned to him, clearly caught off guard. "What?" "Just stop," he said again, his eyes fixed on the table. "You don't know what you're talking about." The room went dead silent. My mom looked between Tim and me, her brow furrowed in confusion. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice cautious. Tim sighed and leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "It's my fault," he said finally. "Everything you've been blaming Sam for, it's my fault." Amanda blinked, clearly baffled. "What are you talking about?" Tim hesitated, then looked directly at me. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have spoken up sooner. You've been carrying this alone for too long." My heart started pounding, and I felt a wave of panic rising in my chest. I wasn't ready for this. "Tim," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do," he interrupted. He turned back to the rest of the table, his expression grim. "A few months ago, I called Sam because we were about to lose our house. I didn't know what else to do. I was desperate, and I begged for help." My mom's eyes widened, and Amanda looked like she didn't believe what she was hearing. "Sam drained their savings," Tim continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Maxed out their credit cards. Even took out a loan to cover the balance of our mortgage. Sam saved our home, and I promised I wouldn't tell anyone because I didn't want the family to know how bad things had gotten for us." He looked down at his hands, his voice barely audible. "I thought I was protecting my family by keeping it quiet, but I didn't realize how much it was costing Sam. And when everyone started blaming them for not helping, I stayed silent. I let it happen, and that was wrong." The room was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. My mom stared at Tim, her expression a mixture of shock and guilt. Amanda's face was pale, her mouth slightly open, as if she couldn't process what she'd just heard. Finally, my mom spoke. "Is that true, Sam?" I nodded, my throat tight. "Yeah, it's true." My mom covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I had no idea." "None of us did," Amanda said, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked at me, and for the first time in months, there was no anger or judgment in her expression, just guilt. Tim turned to me again, his eyes filled with regret. "I'm so sorry, Sam. For everything. For staying quiet, for letting you take the heat. I'm sorry. I didn't say anything. I couldn't." The weight of the moment was too much, and I felt like if I opened my mouth, I might break down completely. The rest of the dinner was subdued. My mom kept apologizing, her voice trembling as she tried to process everything. Amanda stayed quiet, her usual snark replaced by an uncomfortable silence. When it was time to leave, Tim pulled me aside. "I meant what I said," he said quietly. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As I walked to my car, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, anger, exhaustion, and something that felt like the beginnings of closure. For the first time in months, the truth was out. And while it didn't erase the pain or the damage that had been done, it was a start. Finally, the weight of the secret I'd been carrying began to lift. But I couldn't help wondering, what would happen now? Tim's confession was like a thunderclap, shaking the foundation of my family. For the first time, the truth was out, and everyone had to face it head on. No more rumors, no more blame games, no more pretending everything was my fault. But if I'd hoped for immediate healing or a heartfelt apology tour, I was sorely mistaken. The first change came from my mom. The day after the dinner, she called me. Her voice trembled as she said, "Sam, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I feel terrible for the things I said to you." I wanted to feel relieved, to let her words wash away the months of hurt and resentment. But instead, I felt hollow. Her apology was sincere, but it came too late. The damage had already been done. "It's fine, Mom," I said, not really meaning it. "What's done is done." "It's not fine," she insisted. "You've been through so much, and we didn't even notice. I just wish you'd told us sooner." I bit back the response that bubbled to the surface. "You didn't notice because you didn't want to. You were too busy blaming me to see the truth." Instead, I said, "I didn't want to cause more problems." We left it at that. She tried to patch things up over the next few weeks, sending me texts about how proud she was of me, how much she appreciated everything I'd done. But the words felt like bandages slapped over a gaping wound. Amanda, on the other hand, didn't call. It wasn't until the next family event, a couple of weeks later, that she even acknowledged what had happened. We were in the kitchen, avoiding the noise of the living room, when she finally said, "So, I guess I owe you an apology." I turned to her, raising an eyebrow. "You guess?" She winced. "Okay, I do owe you one. I was wrong about, well, everything." I crossed my arms, leaning against the counter. "You were pretty vocal about it." "I know," she said, her voice soft. "And I'm sorry. I really am. I didn't understand. I thought you were being selfish, but now I see that you were just trying to keep everything from falling apart." Her words were more genuine than my mom's, but they didn't erase the months of hurt and betrayal. "I appreciate that," I said finally, "but I don't think things can go back to the way they were." Amanda nodded, looking down at her hands. "Yeah, I figured, but I'll try to do better. That's all I can promise." The biggest change, though, was Tim. After his confession, he made a real effort to step up. He started checking in with Mom and Dad regularly, helping them figure out their finances, and even offering to pitch in for rent when they came up short. He also started checking in on me, though those conversations were more awkward. "How's everything going?" he asked during one of our rare phone calls. "It's fine," I said automatically. "Are you sure?" he pressed. "Because I know you've been through a lot, and I don't want you to feel like you're still carrying this alone." I appreciated his words, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were too little, too late. I'd spent months drowning while he stayed silent, and now that he was throwing me a life preserver, I was too tired to grab it. By that point, I was completely burned out. I'd spent so long being the glue that held the family together, and it had cost me everything: my savings, my mental health, my sense of self-worth. I stopped answering family calls as often. I stopped volunteering to solve everyone else's problems. And for the first time in years, I started focusing on myself. At first, it felt selfish. Every time I spent money on something for myself, a new pair of shoes, a weekend getaway, I felt a pang of guilt, like I was betraying my family. But the more I practiced putting myself first, the easier it became. I started saying no. No to lending money I didn't have. No to taking on responsibilities that weren't mine. No to letting my family's drama consume my life. And slowly, I began to feel like myself again. One night, as I was sitting in my apartment, sorting through a pile of bills, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. The resentment I'd been carrying for months had started to fade, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. I didn't regret helping Tim. His kids had a home because of me, and that mattered more than anything. But I'd learned an important lesson. Sacrificing everything for others doesn't mean they'll appreciate it. Sometimes it just leaves you empty. The next time my mom called, asking if I could come over to help with something, I told her I couldn't. "I have plans," I said, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to explain or apologize. "Okay," she said, a note of surprise in her voice. "Maybe next time?" "Maybe," I said, smiling to myself as I hung up. For the first time in years, my life wasn't about fixing everyone else's problems. It was about me, and that was enough. Looking back, everything feels like a blur. The months of resentment, sleepless nights, and quiet sacrifices all blend together in my memory like a bad dream, I'm finally waking up from. And yet, through it all, one thing stands out crystal clear. I don't regret helping Tim. If I had to do it all over again, I probably would. His kids are growing up in the same house they've always known, with their treehouse in the backyard and the growth chart pencil marks still etched into the kitchen doorway. That stability means everything, and knowing I had a hand in preserving it gives me a sense of peace. But here's the thing I didn't understand back then. Helping someone doesn't mean sacrificing yourself. What I did for Tim came at a massive cost, financially, emotionally, and even physically. And while it was the right thing to do, I can't ignore how much it nearly broke me. These days, I'm in a much better place. I've been slowly climbing out of debt, chipping away at the credit card balances and the loan I took out. It's not easy. I still have to be careful about every dollar I spend, but the progress feels good. I've even managed to rebuild a small emergency fund, which is something I never thought I'd see again. I've also started setting boundaries, which has been its own kind of challenge. My family isn't exactly used to hearing the word no from me, but I've learned that I don't owe them an explanation. The first time I declined a request for help, it felt like pulling teeth. My mom had called, asking if I could contribute to some unexpected expenses, and I could feel the familiar guilt creeping in as she explained their situation. "I'm sorry, Mom," I said, forcing the words out. "But I can't help with that right now." There was a long pause on her end before she said, "Okay, I understand." And that was it. No arguments, no guilt trips. Just a simple acceptance that I wasn't in a position to be the family's safety net anymore. My relationship with Amanda is still strained, but I've made peace with that. She's not the type to admit when she's wrong, and I've stopped waiting for an apology that will probably never come. That doesn't mean we don't talk. We still see each other at family gatherings, and we've managed to keep things civil. But the closeness we once had is gone. Tim, on the other hand, has made an effort to repair things between us. He's stepped up in ways I never expected, taking on more responsibility with our parents, and even pitching in when they need financial help. He checks in with me regularly, and while I'll admit it took me a while to let my guard down, I've started to forgive him. One night, over coffee, he said, "I don't think I'll ever be able to repay you for what you did." "You don't have to," I told him. "Just don't let it happen again." He nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. Deal? The biggest change, though, has been in me. For the first time in years, I've stopped trying to fix everything. I've stopped carrying the weight of my family's problems on my shoulders and started focusing on my own needs. It hasn't been easy. There are still moments when the old habits creep back in, when I feel the urge to step in and save the day, but I've learned to resist them. I've started prioritizing my mental health, too. Therapy has been a game changer, helping me unpack the guilt and resentment I've been carrying for so long. It's also helped me understand that helping people is a choice, not an obligation. One of the most important lessons I've learned is that saying no doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't mean you don't care, and it doesn't mean you're selfish. Sometimes saying no is the healthiest thing you can do for yourself and for the people around you. My family still isn't perfect. There are still disagreements, misunderstandings, and moments when the past threatens to resurface. But I've stopped letting those things consume me. The other day, my mom called to ask if I could help with something small, a ride to an appointment, nothing too demanding, and I said yes. Not because I felt obligated, but because I wanted to. When I hung up, I realized how far I'd come. Helping people used to feel like a weight around my neck, something I had to do to prove my worth. Now, it feels like a choice, one I can make on my own terms. And for the first time in a long time, I feel free. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that boundaries are a form of love. Love for yourself, love for the people you care about, and love for the life you're trying to build. Helping others is a beautiful thing, but it can't come at the expense of your own well-being. Sometimes the best way to help yourself and the people around you is to say no. And for me, that's more than okay. It's necessary.